Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Native Nations for our special Solstice program. And I want to wish you all a Happy New Year. If you didn't know, today is New Year, celebrated among the Native people in the North America and all around the world, probably. It's a very special day where we give thanks for the return of the sun, and we look back on the bounty of the year that was provided for us and give thanks. So it's a very special time at solstice for people to gather and to socialize and to eat, to feast together, to partake of our first foods, water being the first food. So there are celebrations going on back home on my reservation, the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation, where I was born and lived for a short portion of the start of my life. And welcome to Native Nations. We were hoping to get a guest for tonight, but it didn't work out, so we'll have a guest next week. We do have planned next month. We have plans to show a little bit of Winona LaDuke from one of her talks that she gave, and that will be coming up at the bottom of the hour. So stay tuned for that. There's a lot of things that I would like to discuss, but first of all, I want to say how proud I am of my tribe. The Umatilla tribe put out this book not too long ago, the Umatilla Dictionary. It was a years-long process, probably 20 years of this guy Noel Rood, our linguist, who spent time interviewing elders and learning the language, and he was actually very proficient in the Umatilla language, the Sahaptin dialect that we used on the Umatilla Res. And, you know, there's a word for almost anything that happens, and I happened to open the dictionary earlier today looking for words and found a really interesting word. It's Tauti'itna, Itauti'itna, which means he broke wind in bed. So there is a Umatilla word for almost everything, and that was a funny one that I came across today. I like to go through the dictionary, just try and learn new words. And some of my friends from the tribe who post on Facebook, they will post only in the native language. So I have to pull out my dictionary and find out what they said. And in doing that, I learn the language bit by bit. So it's a crude method, but it's the best I can do living off the reservation to try and advance my understanding of our language, our Sahaptin language that's spoken on the Umatilla Res. These dictionaries, which I would recommend for any tribal member, are available from Temuslit Cultural Institute back home on the Umatilla Res. For a small fee, you can get this book, and dictionaries are very valuable for any language. So it was a big deal when our tribe got this dictionary. It sort of gave us the bona fides that we are a people, we have our language, and it is now solid in black and white, and it's not, we pass it down, verbally, orally, but to have this book is really precious for our people. So I'm really proud of my tribe for putting this together. Now I know the Yakima has one too. One of their tribal members put together a Yakima dictionary, and we had a guest earlier, or it might have been last year, Eric Bernardo, who is learning the Chinook language, Chinook jargon, and he is putting together a dictionary. It's not as comprehensive, but we'll have to have Eric back on to see what kind of progress he's made on Chinook jargon. The other thing that I'm really proud of my tribe putting out in the last year was this book. Now, I think I've talked about it before, Kaupawalakni, they are not forgotten. The elders back in the 50s and 60s, there was an Indian Claims Commission court cases that all the tribes were putting their claims up to the Indian Claims Commission for retribution for loss of land or loss of other resources. So in our case, what we were trying to do back then was establish the tribe's residency in and around our reservation. So it was a legal document when we first put it together, and what happened was members of the tribe went around, drove around the reservation, and would go to an old site that they had used for hunting or fishing or root digging or berry picking or whatever the case was. And the attorney, George Sewell, I think, who was the attorney, he was one of the attorneys, would write down the place name and how it was used, and they had a good record when they went and made these claims in front of the Indian Claims Commission as to what were our lands, what did we traditionally use these lands for. So about 5 or 6 years ago, the tribe started initiating this project to use the Swindell report, George Swindell, and other sources, elders in the tribe, and other records to find out what place names still existed. And, we map them, put a location down, talk about how they were used. And if it was a real sensitive location like a burial ground, it wouldn't be included in this book. So it was for general properties like berry picking grounds. The berries are still there and people can go and pick them, so it's not any big secret. So this is a great historical reference that is in black and white. Instead of us passing down all the information orally, as was our tradition, we're kind of moving into the 20th century, not the 21st, the 20th century, and getting some publications out about our tribe. So you can learn a lot about the Umatilla people in the dictionary and in this book. So if you want to learn more about the Umatilla people, this is a great place to go. And of course, this is available too back home on our res at the Temustelik Cultural Institute. So if you want to get a copy, I'm sure you could do that if you contact them. And one of these days, I'm going to have to add to this book because I have a bunch of information about archaeological sites that, of course, they don't have names, but because I know personally from being on the ground where these sites are, I have a responsibility to put some sort of permanent record down. So I'm actually going to use this book and use the places associated with this book to mark down the sites that I know of personally that I visited, or when I was a little kid, my mom and stepdad violated the Antiquities Act by digging in old campsites in and around the Umatilla Reservation. I can confess this now because it was back in the early 60s when we were doing this. And I'm sure the statute of limitations has passed. But we were guilty of violating the Antiquities Act. We were collecting artifacts along the Columbia River like thousands of other people were doing back then. And it got so bad that that's when they started sending the police out and getting stronger laws. The National Historic Preservation Act, 1969, really was what solidified enforcement and made it so that you could not go out and just dig for artifacts anywhere you wanted, anytime you wanted. So I was really glad that those laws came in effect because it helped to preserve a lot of our artifacts that have been scattered all over the country. When the Columbia River, the dams were first starting to be constructed, people were just robbing any sites they could that were going to be destroyed, backed up underwater in the reservoir. So it was pretty rampant back in the 30s and 40s and 50s. So what I want to do, it reminds me that we need, as a tribe, we need to make an appeal to the people of Oregon, the people in the Northwest, the people of around this country who have taken artifacts from the Columbia River Basin. I know there are thousands of you out there with collections that may include human remains. If you have human remains that were collected from the Columbia River, please, it's not good to have human remains in your possession. It's not good for the spirits. It's not good for the remains themselves. And what are you going to do with these human remains after all? Show them off to your friends? Probably put them in a box and stick them in your basement somewhere. Well, I want to appeal to all the basements with artifacts, especially human remains. Please return those remains to the nearest tribe if you know the location of those, the source of those remains. It's imperative that you remove those from your possession, remove them from your property, get them away and get them back to where they can be put in a secure, safe burial away from everybody. We could bury them next to Kennewick Man, which takes me back to this year, 2017, for me was the year of the shovel. And I'll tell you why. January, we got a lot of snow, especially in Hood River. And I was shoveling snow so much, by February, March, I was the strongest shoveler I had ever been. And it turned out that that strength, that skill, came in real handy when it was time to rebury Kennewick Man. I was very fortunate to be there when they reburied Kennewick Man, and even so lucky that I was running a shovel and throwing dirt on Kennewick Man in the ground. So that was very valuable, very precious for me to take part in that burial after all I'd been through with Kennewick Man. To see him in the ground and to help put him underneath the dirt was a great experience for me, and I'll never forget it. The shoes that I wore for that, I stuck my foot into the dirt as far as I could so I would get some of that dirt inside my shoe. And I wanted to carry that shoe with that dirt, and it'll be with me for the rest of my life. That's how precious that moment, that time, the burial of Kennewick Man was such an important event for me personally. And it gave me a release. I wasn't burdened with knowing that he was outside among us. He's back in the ground where he should be. And that put my soul a little more at rest, knowing that. One of the things that I wanted to do while we're here tonight is give some great thank you to Metro East Community Media. This TV station is the only place where you can hear the voice of Native people telling you about the issues that are important to us. And I can never really repay them for all the years that we've been out here giving you voices of Native people in the Portland community and bringing attention to issues that you need to know about, telling you about the change in seasons, when to go pick huckleberries, when to dig roots, talking about the ceremonies and the events that happen in Indian country, in and around the Portland area. And because I'm a Umatilla tribal member, of course, we feature Umatilla tribal members regularly in the show. And I don't apologize for that. But Metro East has been a really good friend of Native people by helping us to provide you this programming for 20 years or more. And thank you to Metro East. We really owe you a debt. Now, there's a lot happening in politics that is really concerning right now that has a big impact on Native people. And one of those is the loss of national monuments down in the southeast. Bears Ears is one of them, and Escalante Grand Staircase. They've been wanting, the proposal is to reduce the amount of national park by 80% or even more. I'm not sure exactly. But it's kind of disgusting to me that the Antiquities Act has always been used to add national monuments to public lands. And now, this is the first time in recorded history that an administration has wanted to remove lands from the public trust under the guise of allowing Native people access to their sacred lands. I heard the comments that Trump made while he was signing the reduction in the national monuments. And he said, now the Native people will be able to access their sacred lands, and the public lands will be really public. It turns out that that same afternoon, the 5 tribes who had an interest in Bears Ears and who were co-managers of the National Monument filed a lawsuit within hours of Donald Trump signing the Reduction Act, or whatever I don't know how, something that's never been done before, so, which is par for the course for the Trump administration. But to take this public land away from the public and saying that you're giving it to the public doesn't really fly. And the tribes who were co-managers are worried now because they're not a part of this new boundary. And who will it benefit? Are the uranium miners going to be moving into the removed areas from the National Monument? It's highly likely. Indications are that it was the uranium companies that were pushing for the reduction of the Bears Ears National Monument and Grand Staircase, Escalante Grand Staircase. And this harkens back. What started this, in my humble opinion, is the Citizens United decision that the Supreme Court gave us, making it legal for corporations and individuals to donate as much money as they want to donate to their friendly politician, which is more like payola, because now money is such a big part of politics that if you don't have money, you have no power in politics. Just take, for example, the tax scam that was passed by this administration, the Senate and the House. They cut taxes for the rich permanently. They cut the taxes, some taxes for the poor for a little while. It's going to be very hard on the poor in the future because of this new tax scam that has been shoved down our throats, a favorite phrase of the Republicans. Because, did you hear about the national hearings that they had on this major change in the tax plan? No, you didn't hear about any hearings because there were no public hearings. The Senate, the House, nobody wanted to know what the public had to say about making major changes in our tax plan and putting us in debt to 1.3 trillion, 1.4 trillion in debt, giving the money from the poor to the rich. And now, since there's all this revenue will be lost from the tax cut, the only way to make up the revenue is to take more money from the poor. So let's cut Medicaid. Let's take Social Security away from the poor. Let's take Medicare away from the poor. And this is what it's looking like now for the poor in America in about 10 years are going to be at such a dire strait that there probably will be a revolution, because eventually people will realize that they're not getting a tax cut. Oh, I'm not getting a tax cut. Maybe I should protest, or maybe something's wrong. Well, yes, something is wrong. If you're poor, you're not going to get a tax cut for very long. And the rich will be getting incredible amounts of money. I mean, it's disgusting to see the numbers that the rich are getting when they don't really need it. They're already rich, and now they're going to be ultra rich, which doesn't make any sense to me. We need a maximum wage to prevent the rich from completely taking over politics. I mean, you can buy a politician now. And one of the things that happened late in the negotiations in the tax plan, when Senator Bob Corker didn't want the tax plan, he wasn't agreeable to the tax plan, so they added a provision that would help large real estate LLCs, which is what Bob Corker does. So he got like millions, a couple $1 million tax break through one special provision added to the tax plan to get his vote. So clearly, money now plays the major role in politics, and if you don't have money, you have no power politically. So watch out for the millionaires, because they're coming to rob the poor. I think that's about enough for the tax scam. Boy. So we'll find out what happens with the court decision in the case of the tribes suing this Trump administration. The National Resources Defense Council is also suing the Trump administration over the reduction of the national monuments. And the courts are probably our last hope, our last chance of preserving a life that we had here in the United States of America, where public lands were really public lands, instead of taken away from us and given to the profiteers, the drillers, drilling companies, oil companies, mining companies. That's clearly, the corporations are back in charge, and it's going to be very difficult for Indian people especially, because I don't know of any Native American millionaires. There might be someone out there somewhere, but it would be few and far between, I'll tell you. Let's get off that subject for a minute. And while I was giving thanks for the bounty of the year, here is an instance of smoked canned salmon, Columbia River Spring Chinook. I got this from my good friend Clifford Shippentower. And this is going to go to our crew back there behind the window. Jim is getting this one. Huckleberry Jam, the Huckleberry Harvest in August is one of the major events for our tribe. It's one of the 4 major feasts that we have every year, the Huckleberry Feast. And this was harvested by the Shippentower girls, women, who go out and dig or pick up by Horse Heaven, Mount Adams. And this Huckleberry Jam is going to Karma, so our crew is getting some goodies. And thank you, Jim, for the gift you gave me. I appreciate it. So happy Christmas, Merry Christmas to everybody. Happy Hanukkah. There's a lot of holidays that come this time of year. And if you're looking for a powwow, New Year's Eve, it turns out now that everybody's having a sobriety powwow on New Year's Eve. They don't want people to go out and party and get drunk. Come to our longhouse, enjoy our powwow, see the new year in with your dancing friends. There is powwow on almost every reservation on New Year's Eve. So if you're looking for a powwow, they're easy to find. We're getting near the bottom of the hour now, I see, and pretty soon we're going to bring you a little clip from Winona LeDuc, one of our best friends of the show. But I also wanted to mention that the place where I work, the Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission, has a special lamprey photo project that they're doing, and they're looking for photos of lamprey, eels as they were called, from the historic standpoint. So if you have some really old photos of any lamprey on the Columbia River or anywhere in the basin, the Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission would love to see those pictures, would love to have copies of them. We're trying to accumulate all the historic photos of lamprey to try and get an idea of the potential population, the extent of the lamprey, where they were breeding, where they were spawning, where they were spending their early life. It turns out that they spend up to 4 years in the streams where they're born before they go out into the ocean. So we're learning a lot about lamprey, and a lot of new studies are coming out. So this was a project that the library was kind of involved in, and I'd like to make a plea again to see if we can get some photos of lamprey from around the basin, some really old photos of lamprey. So, and if you notice, I don't know if you can see it, but right here, this woman right here is drying eels on a drying rack near the Umatilla River. And so eels are an important part of our culture, and they were an important part of our food, and they're very good for you, high in protein and really good fats. So we're working on restoring the lamprey to the Columbia River Basin back to higher numbers. So I always like to give a shout out to lamprey as a very important species in the region that have kind of been ignored over the years and treated like a trash fish, and the state of Oregon tried to eliminate them. So a shout out to lamprey. Let's go to Winona LeDuc and get inspired by her wisdom and knowledge. And Winona has started a neat project that she may not talk about in this, but she is working on growing hemp to make clothing and fiber for paper and everything. Hemp is a miracle product and can do a million things. You can eat it, you can fuel your car with it. So I'm really glad that Winona has jumped on the hemp bandwagon, and let's hear what she has to say in this presentation. And I think she gave at the University of Oregon earlier this year.
Way Maganaduk, Nigagregitimagas, Bine Seque to go, Makwandodeum, Gavabani Kagish, Kaniganing, and Dunjaba Miigwich. Thank you all for the honor of being here with you tonight. I have a lot of friends out here, a lot of people I know for many years, really honored. People came out, all you Wintus that came from way down there. Right? So my girls, I have so much better time I see them, I just can't quit laughing. So, really honored to be here. I feel like, first, this is an epic moment. This is our moment. Look out there, we're the people that got a shot at stopping them from genetically engineering the world's food supply. We could do this, stop them from combusting the planet through oblivion. making a lot of other things toxic. We have the chance to do something that is great spiritually. And we're going to do that because of our relationship to our Mother Earth and the reaffirmation of our relationship to Mother Earth. And so that is what I was asked to talk to you about tonight, kind of this epic moment we're in. Sometimes I feel like Frodo and Sam, you know what I mean? It's like, wow, let's go. Because it's ours. You know, there's no one else who's going to do this right now. So it is our moment to do these things, to make Minoya Oma Aking, this good life here on this earth that the Creator gave us. And to make one that is here not only for us, but for our generations that have not yet arrived. So as I thought about what to talk about tonight, I was asked to speak about the rights of nature, thought about traditional cultural properties and cultural landscapes. Have you guys heard those terms? Those are kind of more academic terms, but it means how you live there. And I want to talk a little bit about that because if you live in the same place for a super long time, you understand all about the ecology of that region and the spirit of that place. And so it is not just that about the rights of nature, but it is also about our reaffirming our relationship to those places. And that is really a lot of what we must do and we must remember to do, because we are in ourselves spiritual beings as well. And there's something that over the process of colonization and separation, we often let that power be taken from us. And there is no time like now to recover that power. This is the time to recover that power. You know, as I look out there in the forces that gather to the east, is that what we shall call them? The ascendancy of the Trump presidency, which to many of us is rather unbelievable. I feel it is really important for us to also talk about what making America great looks like. And I think we have a different idea, and that must be our process too. Because one thing that I refuse to do is to let them take from us our power. Whether it is, you know, when they talk about that they have faith, I too have faith. I have great faith, but I'm not a Christian. When they talk about, you know, what they want to see, we have vision too, and we must actualize that vision. And so this is a battle that continues today, but the reason I tell you these stories is that the rights of nature also exist within the construct of the social relations and the spiritual relations that people have to those places. That those relations are reaffirmed by our people. It is said, one time I heard it said that the difference between native religions and you know, the dominant religions of the Christianity, Judaism, Islam, is that those religions were referred to as commemorative religions. This is very interesting because they commemorate very significant teachings by great spiritual leaders. Our religions, indigenous religions in the Western Hemisphere, I have heard called reaffirmation religions. Reaffirmation because in our spiritual practice, whether it is our dances, whether it is our Medewan ceremonies, or whether it is all of our, you know, our feasting and our fasting, we reaffirm in each season or at each time our relationship to our Mother Earth. And you know, what I would suggest to you is that the challenge that we face here in North America is that it is essential that we that collectively have come to live here. First, you know, that you say, you're all going to stay here, so act like you're going to hang around. You know, that's what I like to say. You know, I have a really good friend named Mike Wiggins, who was the tribal chairman of the reservation known as Bad River on the shore of Lake Superior. Many years successfully fought a big mine project, a taconite mine, huge mining project. They would just pour in there, and he would listen to the hearings of the state of Wisconsin. And in those hearings, he would hear them repeat things over and over about the, you know, the capital gains and the production and the profits. And he said, one time I was standing with him, we were actually at Medewan ceremonies, and he was standing there and he says, you know, seems like those people don't want to hang around another 1,000 years. You know, and that is really what it is about in part. Mino Oma Aking, making peace here with this earth. Being the people that recover relationship, spiritual relationship, and learn how to act like we want to stay here. Remembering that this year, This land, Oma, is also the Holy Land. The Holy Land is not someplace else. So let me tell you the story of a place that is sacred today. This is a woman that is standing on the shore of the Missouri River. The Missouri River is known also as one of the more sacred rivers in the territory, a river which swirls at a place where there's a confluence of the Cannonball, known as the Cannonball, and the Missouri River. The Cannonball River is really a place where the sacred stones were made. And that is to say that in the current of the river, the sandstone in the confluence of the two rivers would swirl. The current would swirl around the sandstone and made these giant round rocks that, of course, the settlers referred to as cannonballs. That is why they called it the Cannonball River. But it's really the sacred stones of the river themselves. And so one begins to discuss what is sacred about a place. One has to begin with the intersection of all that is beautiful in that territory. And when you have the power of two rivers coming together, there is something that is much greater, much more beautiful than any of us would know. And that is the sacred stones that are created in this confluence. In this same place is the place where at one time, when I think about making America great, I think about 50 million buffalo. That's when America was great. You know what I'm saying? 50 million buffalo. Single largest migratory herd in the world. The pounding of their hooves would change an entire ecosystem. The resonance of the hooves and the pounding of the herds would change how the water related to the soil and related to the plants. Just imagine 50 million buffalo. That's when America was great. America was great when there was 250 species of grass on the northern plains. Biodiversity, tremendous biodiversity. America was great when there was billions of passenger pigeons. That is when America was great. Now we are people who have not seen all of that, but we need to be people who do not have ecological amnesia. That is to say, we cannot be people that forget that beauty and that greatness. Because someplace the spirits of those beings exist. And they count on us not only to remember them, but to whatever ability we have to bring them home. I'll tell you some stories about that in a little bit, but let me tell you a little bit of the story that we are now all watching unfold in North Dakota, in Standing Rock territory. So it is a long story, but what I will tell you is that the Missouri River is the epicenter of northern agriculture in this continent. That is to say, very much like the Nile River Valley. Now, I know in the mythology that created America, there's some kind of idea that we were just like hanging around and I don't know what we was all eating. But someone had to come up with 8,000 varieties of corn before Monsanto. Right? You understand what I'm saying? It's like we had this pretty good. We had 8,000 varieties of corn. That's a lot. We wasn't just chilling. We was working. And a lot of that was the work of women. Actually collecting, if you think about actually a good portion of the world's food, as you know, is grown by women, because not only do we want to know how it grows and how it, when it arrives, but also we want to know how it cooks, if it tastes good, right? So seed selection, why would you want to grow something if it doesn't taste good, right? Seed selection is often the work of great women. So all of these varieties exist in this territory. In this territory, many different people live there. Mandan, Hidatsa, Arikara people. Smallpox epidemics devastated those communities. Early 1800s, many of those communities almost disappeared. That is something that is very little recorded in history, very little recorded in the memory. And the dams in the 1960s, called the Pick-Sloan Project, a set of dams assaulted the Missouri River. And in that assault on the Missouri River, they not only changed the ecology of the river for the benefit, it is said, of agriculture in that region, but the 200,000 acres that itself was taken from the Standing Rock Nation, the Hunkpapa people, the 200,000 acres contained 95% of their timber and 75% of their wildlife. They drowned a lot of the people's culture. which is what our people understand happens to us when you have big dam projects. And almost every big dam project in North America has flooded our people, has flooded our people. That is what happened there, and that is how a people go from being wealthy to being poor. And so what you are seeing unfolding in North Dakota today is a result of a long history. It is not something that just happened. And so people tried to recover from that and never could kind of successfully get a grip on that. Because what would happen is some other Indian policy would come. For instance, they were told they were supposed to be able to farm. And then most recently, this lawsuit called the Keeps Eagle lawsuit has been settled. And in that, just like the black farmers lawsuit, all of those Indians were denied loans. Much of their land was allotted out to non-Indians, sold or leased, and so today within the Standing Rock Reservation, there are very few native ranchers. Compared to other reservations, there are some. But people were forced into poverty. And in that poverty, the state of North Dakota began to flourish. And the reason I say this is that all of us are kind of watching, I believe, with some horror, what is happening. 485 people have been arrested so far. The situation of those arrests, everyone has been strip searched. Many of them have been cavity searched for misdemeanors, right? I talked to Ron, his horse Thunder, former Tribal College president. I think he's the chairman of the board of the Tribal College now. Former Standing Rock councilman. He's a lot older than me. He's in his mid-60s, and he says, yeah, me and the wife was standing there, was watching what was happening, and they kept pushing at us, and we just stood our ground. We just stood our ground. Those cops kept coming, He says, and then they arrest us. And my wife and I, we spent 9 hours in a dog kennel. That's Standing Rock.
Well, I've never had to spend any time in a dog kennel, unless it was of my own choice. Standing Rock was quite a deal, quite an event. And then one of the first things that Donald Trump did as president was to approve the Dakota Access Pipeline. There was some news recently about a pipeline down in Mexico near the Yaqui tribal reservation that they actually dug up the pipe and cut it and removed it from the ground, which is good first-hand action to take. It may be a federal offense, I don't know, but we really need to fight the pipelines. Fossil fuels are an anachronism. We need to move into the 21st century with wind power, solar power, other sources of energy. This gas and oil is choking us all to death, and the air will be no longer compatible to human beings if we don't start cleaning things up. So I'm really worried about the pollution that the new administration wants to bring in and start developing more oil wells, more natural gas wells, more drilling. That's not the way for the future. We're going to run out of those sources of energy. We need to use renewables exclusively and turn to hemp for paper and fuels and food. Hemp is so easy to grow. It's like a weed. A friend of mine, here's an example. He dropped a seed somehow near his front door. Went on vacation. By the time he got home 6 weeks later, he got arrested for manufacturing marijuana in his front porch, which grew all by itself without him tending it or doing anything. It's so easy to grow, and it makes so much sense to go to a hemp economy. We wouldn't have to log. We could actually raise some old growth timber again, which is the most resistant to fires. Fires are a big issue, right? Well, old growth is very hard to burn down by a fire. And if we had more old growth in the forest, it would be protecting a lot of the forest. It wouldn't be susceptible to burns like the younger trees are. Speaking of fire, I've got to say this because the Eagle Creek fire up the Columbia Gorge had a big impact on me as a Hood River resident. And you look at the burned areas, and I noticed that a lot of the climbing ivy that was taking over some trees is gone. The ivy had no defense on fire, but the trees are still there. They did well, the big trees. The poison oak, too, that grew lower on the ground, a lot of the poison oak got burned out. So the Eagle Creek fire was a great benefit to the forest, and it's amazing how the friends of the Columbia River Gorge have come out to have these big planning meetings about, oh, what are we going to do with the fire in the Columbia Gorge, when the friends of the Columbia Gorge have no interest in stopping the clear cuts that are happening on the Washington side of the National Scenic Area, Columbia Gorge National Scenic Area. It's not very scenic when you've got clear cuts in a scenic area. A clear cut is the worst form of eco-terrorism that I've ever seen in my years of working in the woods. So I do have experience working in the woods. I worked for the Forest Service for 13 years in the field, 10 months out of the year. One of the things that struck me most was the thinning of lodgepole. They thought if you thin lodgepole, the trees that are left are going to grow faster and it'll be good for the forest. But no. You realize that the trees, when they cut the trees around the other trees, that they didn't have the competition to grow, so they literally stopped growing. The stumps around those what are they called? They're thinning, the thinning of the lodgepole pine. The stumps are as big as the trees that they left years later because the trees don't grow without that competition. Anyway, the fires have been misunderstood since the beginning, and the tribes used fire to restore their bury grounds and to keep their root digging area clean, and fire is a great thing for the system, but we have been fighting fire now since the settlers came, and it's caused more problems than it's done good for our people, for the earth. So I'm glad I happened to mention that. Another issue that came up was recently is the Spirit Cave remains. Spirit Cave was an ancient cave down in Nevada. Spirit Cave, I think, is in Nevada. And it was on Paiute land. So the remains, the human remains that were found in Spirit Cave have been returned to the rightful owners, the Paiute people down in that area. I'm not sure if it's the Walker River Paiute or who it is, but it was great to hear and see that human remains were going back to the earth and back to the people where they should be and where they should remain. Now, another thing, I've been bragging about my tribe and our dictionary, our publication that we did on our place names. We got some real kudos from Harvard Project Honoring Nations. They picked this book, this project, as one of their highest awardees for the year. It was given out to, I think, 4 or 5 different projects that won quite a bit. It was a $10,000 cash award to the tribe and another $5,000 to Muslik Cultural Institute. Don't hold me to that. I'm not sure exactly how much we got, but it was just rewards for putting together this book. They did a great job here in this publication talking about the book and how it brought together different researchers from the region and how it's used by tribal members. They say a lot of tribal members keep it in their car when they're driving around so they can use it for reference. So it's really great that This book has been recognized nationally by the Harvard Project. They gave us a cash award. So it's really great that the tribe is progressive and doing these projects and getting our name out there so that Harvard knows about us, that Harvard's giving us money because we're doing such a good job. So I'm glad while I was bragging, I had to remember that this was an important kudo we got from Harvard Project just back in September. So I'm really happy and proud of the Umatilla tribe. And finally, I have a book review to do. You know, I love doing book reviews. There's a lot of great books coming out by Native authors, and I've got to read, there's a couple I have at home that I want to read and review for this show. So next January you'll be hearing about those. This book is not by a Native author. This book is called Lines for All Occasions, Insults and Comebacks. Pithy proclamations for looks, the young and old, brains, charade, counterattacks, facetious lips. This is a fun book. I want to read you some highlights because it comes in handy when you are insulted to have a good comeback. Comebacks are really handy. Here's one. A sharp tongue is no indication of a keen mind. Another. It's clear from your behavior that you must have had a miserable childhood. I will always cherish the initial misconceptions I had about you. Here's one that's very appropriate for Fisheries and Aquatic Sciences Library. Does your stream of consciousness have any fish in it? The next time I need an unsolicited and uninformed opinion, I'll know where to go. It must be nice to be free of the burden of intelligence. If I agreed with you, we'd both be wrong. So you get the picture here. There's some really good comebacks in here. Here's another one. I see you've set aside this special time to humiliate yourself in public. Insults and comebacks. Everybody, you know, I can never come up with the right insult, the right comeback, just at the right time. So I need to study up this book because it's got some great comebacks and stuff that can come in handy when you're trying to defend yourself from people who are insulting you or whatever. So that's my book review, my book recommendation for the month of December. And finally, the last issue I want to tackle that we have seen a lot of in the news lately is sexual harassment. Now, when I worked for the Forest Service back in the 80s, the early 80s, we had sexual harassment training. And it was very valuable because I was new in my professional career. And actually, I worked in the field with a crew of guys usually. So we didn't even have opportunities to sexually harass anybody except each other. And I mean, that just, you know, we insulted and harassed each other all the time anyway, just for fun. So sexual harassment became a big issue in the federal government back in the 80s. And it kind of didn't really spread out like it should have. In fact, it's made a real comeback lately when the President of the United States can brag about sexually assaulting a woman and then get away with it and even get elected as president. It's a little confusing, a little disconcerting. Sexual harassment is a terrible way to treat your fellow human being. And when I was a little kid, it became clear to me that I could have a lot more fun with my girl if she agreed to do what I wanted to do. It's called consent. If you have consent, both parties are willing, the wonderful things can happen. The beauty of two people and their shared bodies and feelings and emotions. Consent is like the greatest gift that a woman can give a man is consent. So clearly, consent has to be the main issue now to fight sexual harassment. We need to know that we have consent. If you're just grabbing somebody just because you're a star and you think that they let you do it, that still is sexual harassment. And even calling a woman Pocahontas is sexual harassment. I know that's one of Trump's favorite. It's probably the only Native woman name that he ever heard or knew about. So since he heard Pocahontas was an Indian woman, now he calls Elizabeth Warren Pocahontas, which just means that he's stupid. And it's offensive. He'll even do that in front of the Navajo code talkers who helped save us in World War II. It's just appalling how this president will treat people. He harasses people all the time. So sexual harassment is a big issue. It's a big issue in the workplace. It's a big issue in the Senate. It's a big issue in Congress. So it's a big issue everywhere. Darn it, our time is up here on Native Nations. Thank you, Metro East. Thank you, cast and crew. We are glad that you joined us for this wonderful show, our Solstice show, and we'll see you next January, third Thursday of the month, and have a good end of the year.